many more
multitude.
people have been dead after the Gaddafi was killed?
Well,
I agree.
more.
Yes, I
Much
agree
more.
with you.
many more, many more. Here-
What I was suggesting, just do intervention, stop him,
Not professor
let
deciding
let
this
him
law.
maintain power.
You
Let
give
him
false-
maintain
you-
power
You're giving
to-
false impression that professors are deciding
Let
U.S.
him
foreign
speak.
policy.
Well, here's
Yes, but it was a
let me.
suggestion, and the theory was
Come
to prevent that chaos, prevent all the slaughter, to do simple intervention and stop.
But this is also
They did not do that.
Yeah.
Then Gaddafi was killed, and then it became a failed state, and absolute rogue regimes, like, there's like 17 factions,
Yeah.
I think.
there's a point here though.
So you got a lot of idiots that took over after and pushed it beyond just simple intervention. And I agree with you 100%, and it still pisses me off
Well,
to this day.
the-
Just like simple feeding people, missionary mission in Somalia turned into a military
Let's
mission.
talk about Grey Cardinals who decided for U.S. foreign policy,
Well,
not the professor.
But there's a point here about how U.S. foreign policy is made, though, and the philosophy of U.S. foreign policy. And I don't mean from professors, but the U.S. goes back and forth between idealistic foreign policy and realistic. This began with theory. The big. If you read Kissinger's book Diplomacy, he begins with Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. You know, Theodore Roosevelt, the big guy with the big teeth, the big stick, and you know how many wars were during Theodore Roosevelt's time? 0. But the point is, Theodore Roosevelt acted completely on the basis of what he perceived to be good for the United States in terms of power and realist terms. And the second example is Woodrow Wilson, who at the 14 points, the Treaty of Versailles, who tried to introduce an idealistic mode of foreign policy. And the U.S. oscillates back and forth between these two perspectives. You know, a realist is backing Pinochet in Chile. An idealist is undercutting Hosni Mubarak, who kept Egypt stable for 30 years, which was the best thing for U.S. interests in this guy's opinion. You know, an idealist was saying we're not going to go to Syria because I don't know why. You know, they can figure it out themselves. The idealists won out in Libya. The idea that stability versus human security, it's a huge conflict.
Ultimately, the profiteers came in. That's, you know, I was talking to the person that was traveling with Ambassador Stevens, saying, "Do not arm those rebels."
Yeah.
You're basically creating a group here, and you're trying to do the same thing Gaddafi's doing there. Don't do it. You're going to get people killed. You're going to get Americans
And he
killed.
got himself
Don't freaking
killed, huh?
do it. It got Ambassador Stevens killed and those people
Yeah.
around him. And
Yeah.
I warned those guys, don't do that. And the person that was traveling, the guy who ran for governor of Maryland, was a senior advisor to Clinton, hence the flip-flop with Clinton. When they started doing that, based on Ambassador Stevens' idiocracy, and that guy and Clinton together trying to, you know, have equal arming there, which was stupid, and ultimately it led to Gaddafi's death and failures. So ideology of having constructive foreign policy over destructive foreign policy is a good ideology. It's when the profiteers and the idiots take over afterwards where it becomes a real problem.
What's your question?
I was going to say, it sounds like a lot of times there's emotion that kind of is surfacing as these things act. I would have assumed, knowing how much money the United States throws at this, how many people are looking at these issues, that there must be a playbook that at least generally outlines the strategy, has played the chess game out to a certain level. The details change. For example, Russia walks into Estonia to challenge NATO. Somebody's got to have evaluated that scenario in the United States and has drawn out who would be involved, allies, actors, and
Yeah.
the active discussion around that.
But we do, absolutely do, especially military planners.
Who's going to intervene if Russia gets into Estonia? NATO is not going to intervene.
Oh, I disagree.
I'm
But-
sure.
Good question.
I'm sure.
Would they in that scenario, or is major, like that also leads to these major powers?
I agree with this
versus
gentleman
smaller
over
powers.
here. months before Georgia, when Russia went in to take the port city,
Not in NATO.
I was telling those guys,
Irrelevant.
stop those stupid exercises with Georgia. And Saakashvili was running his mouth against Russia. You were threatening their border security. Dumb. Bush was an idiot. He was, trying to do business. I knew within my mind that that's exactly what would happen, and there's not a damn thing we were going to do. Now, there are lines, but in reality, you don't have to do all that silly stuff. Just be constructive, get along, focus on trade and economics and, all this little silly stuff. The world is not at war like you gave. You've got competitions, you've got regional geopolitical politics and stuff, and you respect those to a certain degree without making it a problem.
Let's hear, why do you feel as though we would intervene?
Oh, in Estonia?
If we wanted to.
Well, if we
challenge
don't,
NATO.
if we don't, NATO's dead, and the whole Atlantic Alliance is dead.
Half there.
That's
I mean, this is the
Yeah.
people in the Cold War. They had integrity. Now there's no integrity by any sort of kind of.
I'm not gonna opine, but
We can say
I mean,
these
and
discussions
put
to
it
Bill
in the
Baker.
worst terms possible. If NATO is attacked like that, and you don't intervene,
oh, it's dead.
proves your point.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
So even if it would be an unmitigated disaster, I think absolutely we would. I don't think it would be unmitigated disaster, but yeah, we would have to rush in to prove you wrong. And I think.
I mean-
Hypothetically, I
Alliance is
don't
an
even know
alliance.
why we're discussing it. It's because it's so far-fetched. Even in Ukraine, Russia's been nice to a certain degree on the border. A little bit of intervention and stuff. It's more of
Really?
a civil issue. No major things. Russia's chilled out. NATO's chilled out. A little bit of things, but in reality, it's not a major conflict, and it's been reducing.
Have you been to Maidan?
I was here. Where were you?
Oh, no. Hey, man.
This gentleman here, he deals with conflict resolution. He's done lots of theories at his master's level, and I think he would agree that conflict things are looking good. Conflict reduction in this region.
Mitigation, basically, and then there's basically solving issues,
I met a lot of those people prior to and during the Minsk agreements, to include leadership from Crimea, and they have done quite well negotiating, reducing problems. You've lost a few thousand people versus hundreds of thousands.
So I think we've actually been getting into a little bit of debate,
Yeah.
but we have invited John here to be our speaker, so I would like to
Okay.
send it back to maybe some other
Yeah.
questions in the
Yeah.
audience.
I'd be glad to leave. He's given opinions on stuff that I did, and I've written books about it. Look it up, Harvey Carroll. And, I did these things. He's talking
Have a
about
nice
the
evening.
It was
market.
a nice discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, and he offered discussion and call only, so hey, y'all have a good evening.
Bye. All right. Sorry about that. I don't know where that came from.
Oh, really? So,
It's
I
fun.
think that he was.
It's interesting that they.
Point, in my world, it's like we have a kind of pyramid, like economy, then we have finance, then we have something which you need to
Mhm.
talk about, and maybe somewhere on the top of that pyramid, we should have people who decides in what future we should live.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but he was.
Well, no, it's okay. I mean, it's an.
And
Yeah.
economy is just so low. And evolution, okay, so.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree, and I think it goes to the point I made at the beginning. So, as we're discussing, because it is a good discussion, agreements or not, but other points, because I think this is good. Yeah.
On the topic of NATO more generally, could you talk about how the alliance fits into, say, discussions at the National Security Council, and how that,
It's a very good question. in the current administration, it's certainly been a talking point because of money. And your points are about the state of the alliance. The White House and the Department of Defense have been pretty adamant that countries need to spend more. But there's a great debate, and this is part of what brought Trump into the White House. There's a great debate about what the U.S. role in the world should be. And it's a debate that's gone on since Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. In fact, it's gone on since George Washington. And why am I talking about the U.S. when you ask me about NATO? Because of the power ratio of the U.S. in NATO. This is a question about what does the U.S. want to be in the world in an era where we're not the only superpower. I think we're still probably the predominant. But China's rising, Russia. People say it's declining or rising or who knows, but Russia's definitely there. There are other actors that take a place in the world, and so what is our role, and what should our role be? And that directly links to the NATO discussion. If America's role is to be an interventionist power, as it has been in the past, then the guys in NATO don't need to spend very much because we're going to keep our defense budget huge and send troops everywhere, and it's going to be fine. But if the U.S. truly wants to redefine its role based on its capabilities, which are in relative decline, just even if relative compared to everybody else, maybe I think we're still absolutely the strongest, but relatively it's a decline. And if we want to recognize that, then if this NATO alliance is important, then you can ask the question, why doesn't everybody pay? We pay it. So I think it's a really valid question about the future of the organization. And if you listen to Secretary Mattis or Kelly, the National Security Advisor, they put great stock in the alliance and focus more and more on Europe. And it's been a big change because we didn't focus on Europe for 20 years. Obama famously said it, we're going to pivot to Asia. And then Europe and the Middle East got a vote, and that pivot never happened because these areas are critical to the world. So did that answer the question at all?
I think so. So it sounds to me that, I guess I might not have asked a very clear question.
Or I could be dancing, you never know.
Obviously NATO doesn't have a representative in the American government.
Right.
Because we're a member of it.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess what it sounds like what you're saying is it is more of a one-way street and less of
Well, so ultimately the United States acts in its own interest.
Yeah, but that's why Merkel and Macron, they just decided lately they're going to increase European military component.
Right.
They're going to invest in their own power. Why should they invest in NATO forces?
That's an observation about what they think. Yeah. And the rise of a European independent foreign policy and defense policy is part of this same thing.
It's a response to Trump policy also.
Yep. Well, Trump said something in Davos, right? He said, I'm going to look out for America first. But the second part that doesn't often get shown, but he said right afterwards, he said, and I expect every other leader in the world to also look out for themselves first. Now, that's not a very globalist perspective, but I think it's an accurate one in a world where anarchy still reigns, where there's no overarching world government. That's about as theoretical as I get. If you can't tell, I'm definitely a realist. So I not unfair to go at somebody after they've left, but I think stability matters in the world greatly, and obviously human rights are important, but stability is really important, and a lot more people get killed by instability than get killed by the other way. That is absolutely my opinion, but yeah. Okay, so some more. This is actually pretty good now.
May I ask what about something happens like chemical, biological weapons in Iraq?
Mm-hmm.
They claim it there, but they don't.
Yeah.
And they don't have responsibility, for example.
Yeah.
Who did this?
So you're talking about the lead up to the invasion
Leaders,
of.
just like Sarkozy. He took money and then make it up.
Oh yeah. So you said sorry. Can you say again? I'm not sure I follow.
The leaders
Yeah.
make some decisions
Yep.
on their own
Yep.
for their own
Yeah.
benefit.
And so
Just
you.
not for benefit of the country. I think they should go to jail. For
I see what you
benefit
mean.
of all people.
But are are you directing that at a specific?
I mean, when America went to war with Iraq,
Mhm.
they claimed there are some.
Oh, in the
But-
specific case of the second Iraq War. Yeah. Okay. Okay. It. There are personal politics involved for sure. They talked about it. Bush's father was attacked and all this risk, but you talked about neocons and so you had the catalyst of 9/11. I don't think there would have been a second Iraq War if it weren't for 9/11. You disagree?
No, yeah, because I happened to work for some American
Yeah.
sort of Pentagon. So I know from the end of 90s, beginning of 2000, there was already talk about the wars. First, we were going to take Iraq, then Syria, then Iran. It was 19 years ago.
But
Iraq was already dead.
But to bring it back though, because I don't necessarily disagree, but that wasn't being driven by the personality of Bush. That was being driven by a group of philosophers and scholars, the senior of which was Don Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, who had the political sort of neocons. What is that? Did you read Fukuyama's book, The End of History and the Last Man? I mean, Fukuyama was a neocon. And if you view this triumphalist view that Western civilization had won in 1990, and that in effect political history was over because the Western way had triumphed, and that's what it was gonna be. I mean, that's the basis of the neocon sort of principles. And then you look at it all kind of ties together with the neocons because you've got this triumphalism, you've got a fetishism of technology because Rumsfeld led the one of the first studies of the ballistic missile defense in the 1990s, which led to the missiles that may or may not that sometimes are in Poland and sometimes not. The missile defense system, which is a triumph of American technological fetishism. And then you've got this idea, which I personally believe highly mistaken, that American democracy can be exported. I think it absolutely can't be. I'm not what do you call the preachers who go out and I don't spread the praises of American democracy around the world. I think it barely works in America. It's like Churchill said. We have the best system in the world, except or the worst one in the world, except every other one. We have a great system in the United States that works. I don't think you can export it. I don't think that any one parliamentary democracy model is perfect for export around the world. Everyone takes a political philosophy and a historical background that leads to it. And so all these ideas came together to the idea that we could democratize Iraq. I know a follow-on question of Iraq is about the oil. All I can say about the oil in Iraq is that if that really was the plan, that we were going to get the oil, we were really stupid about it because we gave all the oil to the French and the Chinese and other people. So it's hindsight, but I reject the oil argument. If it's true, then wow, we fumbled that ball really, really badly. But yeah, I mean, I see your point about the decision-making for Iraq, but the decision-making from Iraq wasn't from the personality of George Bush, which I think is you're talking about presidents' personalities and their impact.
I mean, some people actually lie about something.
Yeah, I see your point. Yeah, I mean...
Like it's not American, it actually was political blame.
I don't know what to say because I'm going to...
No, he said he then admits that what he said about weapons it was not true.
Here's the thing. Saddam Hussein... I'm dancing. Saddam Hussein damn well wanted the world to think he had that stuff. And he paid the price for making the world think he had it. Because if you look at what the Iraqis were saying, they absolutely, you see what I'm getting at? Now, I don't deny, obviously, when Colin Powell went to the UN and he said the trucks and the movement, obviously that stuff was bad intelligence and not real in hindsight. I know, but
I mean, he
yeah.
admit
Yep.
Tony Blair
Yeah.
that he was lying actually.
Yeah.
It's just was.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It was for me like shock. It's
Yeah.
good for.
There are many
everybody.
lies we can discuss, but the cause and effect relationship.
Yep.
We're talking about effects now. We're not talking about the cause.
Yeah, true.
It's fine.
Yeah,
There are many lies.
good point. Wow, this.
I think for humanity, they should go to jail actually. Just
But if you start that, then the line for jail is going to be very, very long, right? I think there won't be enough jails. So, other questions. I mean, I think okay. So my research was on foreign policy decision making and framing. So we talked about the foreign policy decision making piece, I think, quite a bit. The other side, and I was very disappointed, was about framing, and that means how do you convince the American people and your audiences that intervention is a good thing. And because I was a public affairs professional, and I thought that would relate it to my work, then everything would tie together for my career and my academic aspirations. And sadly, I was very, very disappointed. I was hoping to find out that the discussion of an event would go concurrent with the discussion of how to frame it, how to explain it, how to get support. And I found that really wasn't the case. In almost every case, the decision was taken, and then they thought about how to get support, which, as a public affairs practitioner, really made me sad. There's a saying, why plan when you can react? But it's much better if you plan, as that guy probably would agree if he was a planner, as he says. That I hate to have that whole piece of the title of my presentation be dealt with so quickly, but it's just true. And I told you at the beginning, none of those interventions had a lot higher than 50% support, even when they began, when they were really in the news. And support always declined. And usually support would spike when a senior leader would make a great speech, like when Obama made a great speech about Libya about 3 or 4 days in, and support goes up that day, and then it goes back down. And no amount of cool videos of missiles blowing things up or great stories of embedded journalists will change that. Yeah.
I was just trying to refer to
Yeah.
the word support, because I do see the world through maybe something which is hard to share, but anyway, 2% people they think, 3% think that they think,
Yeah.
and 95 they would die, rather would die than think, and it was the Bernard Shaw's
Yeah.
formula. So okay, that was the way to address.
Yeah.
the word.
Well, the
That's why framing is easy. It's the easiest part.
yeah. Well,
Americans are very good at framing.
yeah, we are. We are. You look at the American
It's not
Revolution.
framing, it is just decision making by 2%.
No, you didn't get it.
Because the rest, they cannot decide.
Well, let me offer. I'll offer you different numbers that say it's a different. That also say a different story. It's not an attack back, but in the American Revolution, about 1/3 of the people were pro-British. They didn't want to leave. We call them Canadians and British now because they did leave afterwards. 1/3 of the people were really indifferent. They wanted to make sure they got a meal on the table, and were taken care of. What people want. Then 1/3 were really in favor of the revolution. They were the motivated. And even of those 1/3, it's probably 1 or 2% who were actually pushing things. And so what is the struggle then? The struggle is to convince that third in the middle, right? Because you're never going to convince the guys on the other side. It almost never happens. So you try to convince the undecided or the ones that you can convince. And I think I don't want to go outside my research and say something that could easily be refuted, but I think you find that's how things are in a lot of issues. You've got your heart, and that's the root of the problem in American politics, which is a totally different issue. But the problem in American politics is discourse has become what happened here. Everything is just a fight. There's no middle ground anymore of discussion. And that's why it's great that we have a discussion like this where, for the most part, I think we are just having a back and forth. This is so rare at home now. Fareed Zakaria said, in one of his zillion books, said that the greatest problem with U.S. decision-making and U.S. government right now is partisanship, hyper partisanship. Nobody will come to the middle to meet and discuss an issue. And it cripples our decision-making. And it cripples our action. And that means it cripples the world. So it's a big problem. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know about the brilliant American promise to protect Ukraine?
Yeah.
And what?
Yeah, well, I don't know what to say because I frankly was outraged when it happened. When a country gives up its nuclear weapons because two other countries say they're going to protect it and then they don't, that's an issue.
Maybe it's a good time to say we will not to protect you, just open policy.
Yeah.
Just say to
I'm
the
afraid
whole
in the
world.
document there was used the term just assurances, no more, no guarantee.
Okay, so there you go, and I didn't know that. Yeah.
On the other hand, there was no real mechanism except the consultation.
Mm-hmm.
There were consultations,
Sure.
actually, but the result.
Right.
Moreover, the aggressor was on the signing states of it. Russia was signed.
Right. So what do you do when one of the
And
members...
number 3, there was no direct military aggression, actually.
Right.
It was the use of abstract forces, like proxy forces.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is what I mean when I say the world is at war. The proxy forces, economic forces, cyber forces.
The question, will NATO react in case of invasion to Estonia or any Baltic state? It depends on what...
Very good point.
It will be this.
But if
it will be,
Yep.
if it will be direct military
Yep.
invasion, yes, the NATO will use its number 5 article.
Yep.
But what happened if it will be like indirect invasion, like in Crimea?
Yeah.
It reminds me,
Good
by
point.
the way, quite a new book of NATO British General Richard Sheriff, War with Russia, with explaining. Despite I was very upset to see his misinterpretation of Russian decision-making process in the book. He explained.
Yeah, it's a very, very good point, obviously. And, I think in 2013 or 14, when Leon Panetta was still the Secretary of Defense, he said that cyber attack would be responded to as if it were a kinetic attack. Now, that was him, and yeah.
It was directly organized by North Korea.
Right. That's the problem. And even if you do know, can you say? And is it in your interest to say? I mean, remember Winston Churchill.
They know, but how to prove?
Yeah. Or maybe you don't want to prove, like Winston Churchill's book Bodyguard of Lies, where they knew the Germans were coming to Coventry to bomb, but they couldn't stop them because it would reveal that they knew, and therefore the Germans would find a way to do something worse. So yeah, it's a big problem. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you about SIM10, their role in decision-making process, and regarding foreign policy and security issues. And in your opinion, what are the most powerful SIM10, for example, in Brooklyn, Connecticut, something like that? And in your career, can you tell us any case of fruitful cooperation between, for example, State Department?
Yeah, not so much State Department, but Congress. And it absolutely just depends who's in power. I guarantee you right now, the Heritage Foundation has a big voice on Capitol Hill. And 3 years ago, Brookings had a big one. And Rand is always out there, but Rand works more directly for the military and the State Department, and not so much for like Congress.
Or Israel.
Yeah, well, yeah, I read Stephen Waltz and John Mearsheimer's book about about support to Israel. I mean, honestly, and not to be evasive, it's not something I know a lot about. I can tell you what the policies have been, like Jerusalem and all these things. I mean, yeah, it's better. I think if this is going to be very political, I think if the location of a city that was already the de jure capital is really the only thing that kept the peace process going, then there probably wasn't one. That's just my opinion. Now, I realize the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is just one little piece of the puzzle that you're definitely talking about. It's a big public one, and it's a very loud one, but it's just a piece. Yeah, I never was involved in anything to do with that level of support and decision making. And I never called somebody or advised somebody to do something about Israel. So I really just don't know.
It's a gray zone.
Yes, a definite one.
I don't know.
A definite one. Yeah. Other questions? I mean, I can always call somebody in Congress and give them a plan. I don't know. I think I'm not done. Yes, sir.
Did you like President Trump?
Okay. So if we're going to talk political, I have to tell you that I am a Republican, if it wasn't obvious already. But listen, in general, I've been in favor. Yes. I would go back to the political process that got us here. You know, when one party basically selected who they wanted and had a process that put the person they wanted in, we got a result. And when the Republican Party basically had no rules and you had 17 people yelling, of course the loudest guy was going to come out on top. And the ideologues will get pushed to the side. It's natural. So I'm completely unsurprised by what happened in the election. Well, I expected Hillary would win, as I actually think Trump did on that day. No evidence for that, but I believe that they expected that Clinton would win. But the process that got us here was extremely messy, and the administration is still bound by the messiness of that process, but it's also bound by its own methods, clearly. I find it interesting as a public affairs guy how things are done in this. And when I say interesting, I'm sometimes elated and sometimes utterly appalled by the way things happen now in the administration. I think of course, this is my political bent, but I think some really good things have happened in the last year, but they happen under a cloud of craziness and chatter and talking about all kinds of different things. Then you find out, oh, this law happened, and now things are really going to be better. Okay, great. We definitely have a situation of the media being disjointed from the governing process in a way that I don't think has really happened before. I don't think that, I mean, the media tend to trend liberal, I think. Maybe not, but it's my belief. But even under George Bush Jr., it wasn't like it is now. I mean, it is almost as if Trump says dog, the mainstream media is going to say cat. It feels that way to me. And how you can even act in an environment like that is, I don't even know how they do it. How they can withstand the bombardment that they get constantly. And I don't know. I mean, maybe it was the same for Obama from the conservative media. Maybe it was. I don't know because I didn't perceive it that way. You know. So was that actually the question, or did I just sort of drive off into nowhere land? The first question was about think tanks, and I started to say it. The think tanks have their main role on Capitol Hill, I think. I don't know of an instance where the head of Heritage like went to the White House and impacted something. Now, that being said, there's a direct line of communication from the Hill to the White House, especially when they're in the same administration. So surely, if a senior Republican leader in the Senate is swayed by information, clearly they have a line to the White House. So that information does get pushed up. But I think that the think tank's primary emphasis is on Capitol Hill. Not exactly as lobbyists in traditional sense, but they're pushed for their agendas on the Hill. So did that help? So I think if you wanted to find out, if you wanted to take the pulse of Washington now, you should look at Heritage as the biggest one.
Well, maybe the super think tank is AIPAC.
Well, yeah, to come back to the Israel point of view. Yeah.
I mean,
Yes, sir.
How do you think? Is it? Do you believe that Russia can influence American election?
Good question, and I'm not. I want to know exactly. I want to say the right thing. Not to make you happy. I mean,
No,
it's a hard question. Okay, 3 years ago, or 3 years ago, Barack Obama openly tried to influence the election of the state of Israel. Openly in the media, he said, "Get rid of Netanyahu." Openly. I think every country tries to do this. Every country that has an influence in another country tries to do something in their elections. It's the most logical, obvious thing to do. While it's never been my job, I have no doubt that we do it in ways that aren't as overt as Obama saying, what he said. So I have no doubt that every power on earth, including Russia, tries to influence every American election. Now, I know you're asking a different question, and you're asking specifically about 2016, and I don't know. One beautiful thing about the American election system, they talked about the Russians were trying to actually take computer control of the voting machines, like direct control. That's absolutely impossible. The electoral system in the United States is so broken because it's all decentralized down to the lowest levels. States and locals are responsible for running the election. It is absolutely physically impossible to physically take over an American election. That's my view on that. And again, I know you're asking something different. I think that you'll find that there's a hand in every pocket with every election, and there may be Mueller will find out something or he won't. I personally think he finds out nothing. But if he finds a hand in a pocket on the Trump side, well, we already know through just the media that there were hands and pockets on the Democrat side too. Everybody plays a gambling bet to win, and you play both sides because you're going to have to work with both sides. So, influence is influence, and you may have a person you prefer, but I very much doubt that the Russians preferred Donald Trump to Hillary Clinton. I really, truly doubt it. In spite of everything that's being said, and in spite of, if some people in his administration, in his campaign talked to some Russians, I guarantee you that it happened on the other side too, and it always happens, and it's a normal part of how the election process works. That's just my opinion. And the first case of this was in the election of John Adams, the second president of the United States. There was a French guy, and I can't remember his name. It was Monet or something. He was trying to stir up support against John Adams in the very second election, the third one, because Washington was reelected. And we reacted with something called the Alien and Sedition Acts, which then allowed them to throw people out of the country. But this stuff has been going on forever and ever and ever. And it's just I think it's a symbol of how hyper-partisan things have gotten and how utterly biased the media is, that this is another thing to beat him with. This week, it's this. Next week, it's who he might have had a relationship with. It's like, what's next? And you know what? Well, you know what's funny? And this is going to be super partisan, but back in January, polling data was certain that that Trump was going to lose the House and Senate in September and November. Absolutely certain. It was taken as an act of God that the Democrats were going to come streaming back. And now nobody talks about it anymore. Nobody talks about it because the polling number now looks pretty good for the Republicans, which is crazy because with one exception, the party out of power always gets a big victory in the midterm elections. The only time it didn't happen in recent memory was Bush's first term in his midterm elections. He picked up seats. That's probably because of 9/11 and heroism, not hero, patriotism and heroism too. But so the idea that Trump, with all the hate that's flying around, might actually keep the House and Senate, it's absolutely crazy. And it says something about how the situation of partisanship in the media. And that again, totally this man's opinion.
I think that says something about the situation of electoral politics and gerrymandering. I mean,
Yep.
there's a whole lot of places that,
Yep, where there's no choice.
yeah, where you can.
Well, I live in the 3rd District of Virginia,
Yeah.
which is like 110 miles long and 3 miles wide, perfectly designed to enclose all the major African American communities in Virginia.
You can
And-
lose a popular vote and have a
Well-
majority in,
But-
in the Congress.
Yeah, well, the thing is, though,
There's more that's broken than.
that you're right.
media.
You're absolutely right. Now, the thing about the Electoral College, I mean, you could say what you want about the popular vote, but that's not how presidents
I'm
are
not talking
elected.
about the electoral college,
Yeah.
I'm talking about congressional districts.
Sure, it's a huge problem, and it is something. There's so much wrong with it, right? Like the censuses only happen every 10 years, so it really matters who's in control of a state legislature when the new census data comes out, because that's when they look at districts in a big way, and so a lot rides on that, but it's so. It is a huge problem. And like I said, I live in Virginia, and there are at least 3 districts that I don't know how they survive a court review.
The
And
court said yesterday they can't review them. So.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh my God! So I've been over
For
here.
partisanship, yeah. There's,
Wow.
There's some precedent, for racial ones, but
Yeah.
the strategy is no, we didn't gerrymander the blacks out, we gerrymandered the Democrats out.
Oh, right,
And
right.
The court just ruled yesterday that that's still not an issue that they're willing to touch.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, for Virginia politics, especially, that kind of makes sense.
So, and that was in a Wisconsin case.
Okay.
Where the stats there.
Well, sounds right for Virginia
the-
too.
The Democrats have just over 50% of the votes, and that results in nearly 60% of the seats going to Republicans.
Yeah.
And that gets repeated a lot, and we're going to have it for a lot longer now for yesterday's.
Yeah. Sure. It's a big problem for the Democrats right now because they've been almost swept out of a lot of state legislatures. One of the biggest news items about the Obama administration, and it's not necessarily his fault. It's a trend that's been happening. It just happened to happen under his leadership.
Well,
But
like you said, it's timing.
yeah, exactly. But the crazy numbers, like 600 state and local state like House and Senate, the state versions of those gone, governorships, state legislatures, and it's a huge problem. And when the party leadership is still like the same 80-year-old people with the same 80-year-old ideas, and they refuse to even look at what a problem might be, but instead they just want to focus on how terrible Trump is. Well, they're going to keep on doing what they're doing. That's just this guy's view. But anyway, way partisan. Sorry.
Just back to the foreign
Yeah,
policy.
yeah, please.
What would be, do you have any, sort of upcoming zones of interest or potential conflict zones, basically, that we're not hearing about now that you think we might be?
This one here in this region, which is a conflict, is very much, on the front page right now. The big one, was North Korea right now. I think the biggest one that nobody wants to talk about, though, is South China Sea. And in some ways, I think a very great game of distract the Americans took place with North Korea, which in the end doesn't matter that much. versus the much bigger problem of freedom of navigation and territorial rights. And again, and is the South China Sea a problem for the United States directly? No. But it's a giant problem for world commerce and some folks who we consider to be big allies. Yeah, so if I had, I mean, that one's probably still in the news more than you wanting me to kind of put the crystal ball and see what might be coming.
That's kind of
Yeah, I think that
doesn't get as much press.
yeah, that's the big one. And then, we still have to figure out what's the end of Afghanistan. It's never in the news anymore unless somebody dies. What's the end? Okay, yeah, we did better than the Soviets. We've been there, 15 years, and they were only there for 9. Oh, yay. That's hardly something to hang your flag on, and be proud about. The Islamic State thing. The Islamic State is a symptom of a problem in the Middle East. It's not the cause of the problem. The problem in the Middle East is structural inequality, bad governance, really, really bad governance, resource-based economies. I mean, that's the problem in the Middle East, and it hasn't changed. Okay, so we finally woke up and beat the tar out of ISIL. Okay, well, in the end, there were only like 30,000 of them. I mean, once a great power was going to focus, it was going to end. But we got to fix the causes, and so every part of the world is still bubbling. That's why I say that in a Sun Tzuist sort of holistic, the world is in crisis, and it's not going to end soon. And whether we're in a state of open conventional war, that almost doesn't matter. Yeah, that's me. Yes, sir.
So I have a question about the proxy wars and about the recent G7 summit.
Mm-hmm.
Trump's decision to again include Russia and make it G8. Well, how it actually connects if two countries are against each other in a war somewhere like 3,000 miles away, and then they want to make a good economic ties. I mean, there's a logical problem as for me.
There's two sides of me on why that happened, and one I'm not going to talk about, but that was interesting to me. There's a such thing as recognizing reality. The optimist in me wants to say that if you bring the Russians in and talk with them and make them part of the community, that's a good thing. The realist in me says, well, they are a big player, and leaving them out doesn't help. And obviously, that's not acknowledging the seriousness of the situation here, or in Syria, or in the Baltics. I mean, I get it, but if you're the ultimate realist and you're playing on the world stage, you bring the big guy in, and that's a very unsatisfying answer even to me. I get it, but I don't want to think it was just poke a stick in Angela Merkel's face, however fun that probably is. Yes.
Okay, sorry for interrupting
Yeah.
this interesting discussion, but we have time for the last question.
Okay, well, it's going to be you. It's going to be an American, yeah.
I understand where you come from there on that position, but if you're talking about economic powers, wouldn't the realist choice for making a G8 be either China, India, or Brazil? Russia.
Yeah, it's fair enough. Yeah. And their economy also is not growing.
Yeah.
It's resource constrained.
Talking about economic powers.
I mean, the Saudis played a great game when they tried to destroy our fracking industry by lowering the price of oil, but the ones who got hurt the worst were the Russians, I think. And this part of the world got hurt much worse. Because what people, and I think this is a point worth saying, what the world often forgets is that the U.S. is probably the most well-rounded power in terms of resources, economy, military, breadth of resources. I mean, yeah. Go ahead.
You're talking about economy, GDP is a fake news.
Fair enough.
You cannot talk about Russia and comparing it to GDP
Yeah. You know, you're right.
China,
You're right.
But the influence.
Influence
But
is a
the
big thing,
power.
and that's
And Russia.
yep.
What they operate? The economy. GDP is 13 trillion by US. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it's just financial engineering. I mean, what is the real GDP?
Good question. But yeah, good point. Good point.
I think you like soccer.
I like soccer.
No, you need to play soccer.
Real? Why?
You have such game.
I'm actually not a sports guy. So many people have asked me in an attempt to get a political reaction about the games in Russia, and my reaction is actually completely political because I don't care about soccer. So I just boycott, don't boycott, whatever. But yeah,
Trying to be politically correct.
yeah. No, I don't care about soccer. Well, thanks everybody. I hope and even the discussion was actually had good points to it.
Nice discussion.
Yeah, absolutely, and all parts. And sorry, I wasn't at Maidan. Sorry, but thank you very much for listening. And I'm here for a few minutes. It turns out, and I have to say it, that by chance, this guy in the back corner, Ivan, he graduated with me. We walked to get our PhDs together 3 years ago in 2015, and he came in the door because he saw the announcement. So I think we're going to talk a little more during the evening. But if you want to ask more questions and hear my awesome opinions, you're more than welcome to. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.